All right. Hello, everyone. So before we get started, Third Place Books would like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the Duwamish people and the land itself. So welcome everyone to our virtual event space. My name is Allie. I'm a bookseller at our Lake Forest Park location, and I'm your host for this evening. I am so excited to be introducing Kyle Lucia Wu and Jane Wong here to discuss Kyle's debut novel, Win Me Something. Before we get into the good stuff, on behalf of all of us here at Third Place Books, I just want to quickly thank you all so very much for tuning in. For those of you who may not know, we are an independent bookstore with 3 locations in the Seattle area. And as much as we miss having these events in our bookstores, it has been such a delight to expand this online program to connect readers and authors in a virtual space. So thank you all so much for tuning in. And of course, for buying books. Your support is what makes all of this possible. So if you haven't gotten your hands on a copy of the book already and you would like to, I will be linking books in chat all evening. For those of you in the Seattle area, come on in. All 3 of our locations are open, or you can place an order online and come pick them up in store. Or if you're not local, we of course do ship. So go ahead and follow that link to in chat over to our website. While you're on our website, I definitely encourage you to check out some of our other upcoming events. We have an exciting roster coming up in the next few months. So if you'd like to stay in touch with our community, you can sign up for our newsletter. It's a weekly update about events and exciting releases, our online book clubs, and of course, follow us on any of the major social media platforms. We are at Third Place Books for the quickest updates and recommendations. Speaking of social media, if you'd like to check out some of our past virtual events, you can find most of them on our YouTube channel, including this event within the next couple of days. So if you'd like to see our other events or share this one, go ahead and track us down over there. We are here tonight for about an hour, and towards the end, we will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, which we very much hope that you do, go ahead and leave those in the Q&A box, which should be either at the top or bottom of your screen. It is different than the chat box, which is great for virtual applause and for connecting with each other. I absolutely invite you to share where you're tuning in from in the chat. But when it comes time for questions, do make sure those end up in the Q&A so we can most easily find them. While you're in our chat and question spaces, I do want to remind you to please lead with kindness and refrain from any inappropriate behavior or harassment. For anyone interested, there are also auto-generated closed captions available from the menu at the top or bottom of your screen. Select the live transcript button to either enable or disable them. And finally, should any technical issues arise, we will work as quickly as we can to resolve them, and we appreciate your patience and understanding. Alrighty, so now is the time for everyone to settle in, because without further ado, I am so thrilled to introduce Kyle Lucia Wu, author of Win Me Something, which Publishers Weekly called a compassionate debut that brilliantly lays out the complicated dynamics of love, belonging, and care that exist within all relationships. She has received the Asian American Writers Workshop Margins Fellowship and residencies from the Malay Colony, the Birdcliff Colony, Plimpton's Writing Downtown Residency, and the Kimmel Harding Nelson Center. She's the Programs and Communications Director at Kundiman and has taught creative writing at Fordham University and the New School. Joining us in conversation this evening, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome back Jane Wong, author of How to Not Be Afraid of Everything and Overpour. Her poems and essays can be found in Best American Non-Required Reading of 2019, Best American Poetry 2015, American Poetry Review, and so many other places. She is a Kundiman Fellow, has received a Pushcart Prize, as well as fellowships and residencies from Harvard's Woodbury Poetry Room, the U.S. Fulbright Program, Artist Trust, and so many more. Her first solo art show was exhibited at the Frye Art Museum in 2019, and she is an associate professor of creative writing at Western Washington University. And just in the last couple of days, Tin House announced that they'll be publishing her debut memoir, Meet Me Tonight in Atlantic City. So everyone keep an eye on that. It's very exciting. So both of you, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to listen in on this conversation. If you need me, of course, give me a shout. I will be listening. Same goes for all of you in the audience. I will be in chat. And with that, I'm going to pass the stage to our authors. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you so much, Allie. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And thank you so much, Jane, for being here as well.
Thank you, Allie. I'm so excited to celebrate your book, Kyle, Win Me Something. I've been kind of trying to like get dressed for this event. I was just like, I was telling you, it's like, I matched the cover, I did it. I'm so thrilled. I know, I love your bow. I can't wait to dive in. Thank you everyone for coming in and listening. Thank you to Third Place Books. Excited to join Tin House too. If you wanna maybe start us off, Kyle, and maybe read a bit from Win Me Something. Which I will say I read in pretty much one sitting. So it's kind of like a fever dream at this point. It's quite like intimate and interior. So if you want to kick us off.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jane. Okay, so I'm just going to read a little bit from the opening of the book. I didn't know what it looked like to take care of someone. I imagined that being a nanny meant watching a small person bounce her backpack home from school, microwaving chicken nuggets on a paper towel plate, and lying with an arm folded behind my head while the bright colors of a cartoon flashed. The intricacies of it hadn't occurred to me, that I'd have to sniff her palms to discern the citrus scent of soap and scrape dirt from underneath her fingernails. How I'd end up eating a room temperature scoop of macaroni and cheese off her plate and raking lice shampoo through her soapy scalp. Maybe I couldn't imagine these moments because when someone asked about my childhood, my mind clenched and closed like two fists in a pool, fingers squeezing for something to come up with when everything around them was a different kind of matter. I had parents, I had siblings, I had homes, multiple or zero, depending on how you looked at it. I wasn't unloved, not uncared for exactly. It was cloudier than that, ink spreading in water as I tried to claim the words. If you're undercared for, but essentially fine, what do you do with all that hurt, the kind that runs through your tendons and tugs on your muscles, but doesn't show up on your skin? There were harder things in the world, hundreds of them. I floated silently through. It was a swampy day in early August when I interviewed with the Adrians. I stood in front of my window unit damply, asking the cool air to soak me up. I'd picked out my most conservative dress, navy blue cotton that reached just above my knees. It had straps that I thought too flimsy for the occasion, so I dug out a whispery pale yellow cardigan from the back of my dresser drawer, something I bought on sale, thinking I might have a professional opportunity to wear it to. And now I did, in Tribeca at 2 o'clock. I had only a muddy sense of why I was going. I sank into an orange seat and felt the train lurch forward at home in my unease. It seemed like I often sat still while the pieces of my life rearranged around me, my only job to be stoic and unmoved, to come up for air and readjust once they stopped shifting. But there was a reason for this interview, I reminded myself. A move out of one service industry into another, a change of hours from late nights working the bar or early mornings at the coffee shop to afternoons and early evenings, hours to make a life around. That appealed to me. The idea of opening my day up to something more, to echo the sleeping patterns of the rest of the city, to chisel out some vision for my future self, the hope that it might find me. The lobby held no trace of the heat wave. A uniformed doorman held open one of the wide glass doors and the glacial air urged me in. I told him I was here to see the Adrians. Willa, right? He said kindly. They're expecting you. He walked me to the elevator and I stepped inside, wanting to stay for a moment before pressing the button, but then I saw him turn a key and press the number 5 before moving back into the lobby. After one short whoosh, the doors opened again and Natalie was standing in her entryway. Even though I knew they had the whole floor, I wasn't expecting to be inside their home so quickly. I stepped off the elevator, the sun in my eyes, and held my hand up like a visor. I felt the slipperiness of my underarms and elbows and backs of my knees prickled by the central air. The entryway had more floor space than my bedroom, where I walked 2 steps from bed to dresser to doorway. The living room stretched a million feet out in front of me, with floor-to-ceiling windows wrapping around each side, a view of sloping buildings and looming silvery towers. There was a cream-colored sectional couch with space for 10 in front of a gleaming glass coffee table, and a wide dining table past that with clear lucite chairs neatly tucked around the sides. The last family I'd worked for, the Ericksons, had not been this rich. Their apartment in Park Slope was much bigger than mine, but recognizable. It was a place where people lived, a place I could imagine myself into in some distant future where I had learned to make correct decisions. But this home, the Adrian's home, I would have imagined a literal castle, a gold-walled Versailles, before this real-world counterpart, a living room the size of a basketball court in downtown Manhattan, that you could wake up and eat toast in a place like this. Thank you. I'll just stop there.
Thank you, Kyle, for reading that opening. I love that you could wake up and eat toast in a place like this. And also like, how, across the novel, Willa is so kind of tough on herself, when I learned to make the correct decisions, that somehow she'd end up in a place like that later in life. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, applause. Yeah, I was actually going to maybe start our conversation with just like our kind of relationship to each other, which I think is always such a tender thing. Obviously, I know you through Kundiman, which is like a big heart space for me, and for all the Kundi fellows out there, just how vast that network of community is, which in many ways I kind of wish Willa had that, or like had a crew like that, because it's, I felt in many ways reading this novel how lonely she is, how deeply lonely. And, I identified with that loneliness growing up, and it really wasn't until Kundiman that I really felt like that connection, that being able to be lonely together, I suppose. And I also wanted to just like shout out your awesomeness as an editor. And if it's all right by you, we just want to read the very opening of an essay that you really worked with me on, which is something that I really adore in terms of friendship and, sharing writing in these ways. And the essay is called A Jane by Another Name, and it's in Joyland, which is such an amazing journal. So yeah, check out Joyland. And yeah, I'll read this little section, which maybe leads into a question that I have already in terms of Willa and how she kind of tries to understand the layers of her identity and how people see her and how that changes how she sees herself. So yeah, this is from A Jane by Another Name. And thank you, Kyle, for working with me on this essay too.
Yes, I'm so happy to hear you read from it. Thank you.
Not Jenny, not Michelle, not Katie, not Cindy. These were the names of the girls in my grade school class, oftentimes in triplicate, so they had to be called Jenny L, Jennifer H, Jen T, and so on. Jenny was the most popular name of all, a name that shines like a penny you make a wish with. When I tell my friends about how I got my name, they think it's hilarious. It says a lot about my mother. My mother, very pregnant with me, I envisioned my fetus self not as a watermelon, but as a hot air balloon filled with fire and a basket of perishable snacks, was working the cash register at the restaurant when it dawned on her that she has to give her daughter an English name to fit in, She says this phrase in Cantonese at least 3 times to fit in, to fit in, to fit in, as if casting a spell upon America, the incantation traveling from shore to shore. And so when the cash register slams shut like an alligator's jaw and the door jingles open, she asks the stranger who walks through, "Can you name my daughter?" The customer is truly from Jersey, something that we both have in common, and does not even skip a beat. "Yeah, sure. How about Maria?" The customer is Mexican American and is picking up an order of chicken and broccoli with some spare ribs too. We're known for our spare ribs, lacquered in hoisin gold. I used the spare rib as a pacifier growing up. My teeth strengthened deliciously. My mother folds over the brown bag twice and staples it shut, the receipt dangling like a tongue. She struggles. Her tongue doesn't know where to reach. She hasn't gone to night school or English yet and won't go for a few more years. She gets as far as Ma, which is actually what she's about to become. Despite living in the States for less than a year, my mother is already a Jersey girl. She also does not skip a beat. If there's something that's never changed about my mother, it's that she never wavers. No, sorry, try again. The customer cradles the food in the crook of her arm and says my name while walking away. The food can't get cold. My name travels with her like a drowsy bee, almost out the door. "Jane," my mother repeats after her. The phone rings and my mother picks it up. But before she takes another order, she covers the phone with her hand and shouts loudly so that the customer who named me can hear her over the car's engine. "Thank you. See you next time." They both smile and wave at each other like queens sharing a float. The best part, my mother does this again with my brother, Stephen. So that's how my name became my name. I was just thinking about that and, working on that essay and also just thinking about, what it means to be quote unquote American or what it means to fit in. And I kind of want to bring us to this kind of first question of mine, where, Willa talks about trying to kind of be kind of invisible or try to, she talks about, wanting to eat the plainest food available, whatever everyone else was eating, so that no one would pay attention to her, right? Because they're calling her, butterscotch or honey or caramel based on her skin, and that there's this kind of she's both hypervisible, like everyone sees her as different and as other, but she's also hyper invisible in the sense of like she doesn't want to draw that attention, that kind of pretty racist attention, and what how that feels. So I was just thinking about that in terms of like having an English name or being named Jane. But yeah, maybe that's my question for you is like, how are you envisioning Willa in terms of her seeing herself through the eyes of others? How she's constantly seen as, strange, or where are you from? Or are you Mexican? Are you, and all these kind of things are said to her. Yeah, I'm curious to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for reading your piece and for connecting it. There's so many similarities that I see, and also your piece is so funny. So I really enjoyed hearing it out loud. In terms of, yeah, so I think it's true that Willa feels very like watched, and like she's constantly sticking out. But at the same time, I think she feels very much like it never goes past that. And I think a lot of people who grow up as someone who is different from those around them has the experience of always sticking out because they're different, they're of, for whatever reason, but the attention kind of stops there because people can categorize them in a certain way. So for Willa, she's Asian or she's biracial, and then no one really takes the time to go further into it. So I think that Willa's in this situation of both really wanting someone to see her as well as really wanting people to stop looking at her. And because the attention that she's received has never felt genuine, it's always felt like it stopped with the superficial And I think that what's complicated about it for her is something I wanted to write about was not just growing up, in a mostly white town while as a person of color, but also growing up, biracial when you have, a monoracial parent. So Willa doesn't feel like she is even like really this, she doesn't feel like she really can claim herself completely as Asian, and she's not even always seen as that. She's just seen as different. So it's very confusing for her because, she doesn't have any sense of validation from someone else like her. So I really wanted to try and highlight just that sense of confusion. And I think that a lot of people don't grow up being pelted with like questions and assumptions about their identity. I certainly did, but I didn't. And so I didn't realize for a long time that that was strange. Like I didn't realize genuinely that it was weird that people would come up to me everywhere I went and ask me what my ethnicity was, because I grew up with that happening, so how was I to know it wasn't normal? And so I just think that way, and constantly having to quantify myself, like I always would lie. And I came up with like the lie that would create the least amount of follow-up questions. And it's just, that's such a weird thing to grow up having to defend yourself about, explain yourself to everyone, and to just like assume that people will come up and like demand this from you. And you don't understand it as a kid. So I kind of wanted to tap into just the confusion around that swirling mess of things.
Yeah, I love that, with the swirling mess of things. And like you said, like, I think that, again, Kundiman, like in sharing these experiences with each other and knowing that this isn't, I guess, like an isolated event, but also like most people, don't have this kind of interrogation of like, where are you from, or what do we do with you, of sorts, right? And I mean, I think that makes, like, we're kind of talking about it already, but Willa is so lonely, and not just in terms of like not having friends, but lonely in her family. And I think that was the most heartbreaking as I was reading the book, was that, at one point she literally, wishes for something, which is for her father to look at her, just like to look at her, just to turn around and look at her. And, it's such a heartbreaking moment, because it's not asking for much, and thinking about the ways in which, she's constantly, like you said, like always aware of how she's like trying to be in the world to maybe attract people towards her, but also like she doesn't want to be like hyper visible in certain ways. I don't know if you want to talk or maybe read a portion of like her relationship with her dad, and maybe what kind of inspired you in thinking about her family in this book in particular.
Sure. Did you have a part you wanted me? I don't think,
Yeah.
I mean, I can, or I could just, you're in charge, Jean.
No, don't put me in charge. It's that scene where they're at like a cool, like he takes her to this like kind of a club or a bar. And then let me try to find the page. Yeah, here it is. This is like 112, 113.
Okay, I'll read a couple paragraphs, I guess. Okay. So in this scene, she's out with her dad one-on-one, which is like a rare treat for her. And he has 2 other daughters and is remarried. I've never told any of the girls about this place, he said, so it's our secret. He flicked his palm, the gesture vague, but the meaning precise. The sake, the beer, the cocktails, the 2 of us. We'd go home and I'd feel quiet and the door would be closed. And when I walked behind him, I wouldn't be able to grab onto his arm. Sometimes when I sat across from him quietly, or when I was in the kitchen when he came home from work and I couldn't think of anything to say, this taut feeling stretched my chest. And I thought to myself, time is almost up. And then that's it. That's your whole chance. Would it be just tonight, the 2 of us in a secret snow globe that was down a stairwell of a restaurant his family wouldn't go to? In a way, I was happy to be hidden, that what he'd shown me belonged to only the 2 of us. We drove home in silence, the music back on, but this time the silence felt comfortable, like if I wanted to, I could reach over and turn the volume down and say something. The windows were dark when we got home, so I thought everyone would be asleep and that we could creep inside and I could lie down, and that would be the last thing I remembered, this feeling of a balloon filled and floating. But as we pulled into the driveway, another car followed us, and we all opened the doors at the same time. Perfect timing, my dad said brightly. The girls folded themselves out of the back seat. They must have slept on the ride home. He held out his arms and they each attached themselves to one side. I clutched at my elbows, sick with how simple it was. There was no room for me there. Just to read that much. Sorry, that's kind of a sad passage.
I don't know why it took us to such a sad passage.
And I guess with the relationship with I mean, I really was interested in exploring like the dynamic of being within a blended family. I mean, I did grow up in a blended family, though mine is quite made up quite differently and is much larger than Willa's. But I had just never seen anything, and I still haven't seen very much about, blended families in fiction and what it's like to, not grow up with a parent, to have siblings that are, half related to you, half related to someone else, and just all of these complicated dynamics. Everything I'd seen about families was usually about one kind of family. And because I really wanted to talk about so much of this in-between identity, I felt like this echoed it so well, feeling in this place of being like stuck between two houses. And what is it like when you're from, I have an older brother. And so me and my older brother were kind of like always like allies in our own like world, but like I would think about like, what if I didn't have, my older brother, and we would drive back and forth from our parents' houses on weekends, and we had each other. And that was, really comforting. But I just thought like, what if I didn't have him? And that's kind of why I started thinking about Willa. And I didn't want to villainize either of the parents in this situation. It's just a really difficult situation. And I think it's actually quite common, to have siblings like stretched across the families, but how can you be the same parent to the child you live with as one that you don't, I mean, it's just questions that I don't know. I was just like wanting to explore the complicated dynamics that I hadn't really seen.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really kind of powerful about the book too, is that we really go into this world in which like that is something that she's trying to figure out herself, and which is why, and I want to start talking about the Adrians, why she kind of clomps, I don't even know how this, she's just like, what, onto the Adrians, and Natalie in particular, of course, like the way that she so badly wants to be kind of part of this family, or kind of at least be close to that desire of like wanting to be needed or something of that sort, right? Because they give her, some attention, of course, not all the attention that she's given, because she works for them, right? And she's, nannying, but that moment, where she's trying to like, she's so lonely in her own living situation, her roommate kind of abandons her of sorts. But I'm just curious if you want to talk a little bit about what it was like, or how did you come up with this kind of story that revolves around her job and her relationship with the Adrians, and maybe Natalie in particular, because I was really intrigued by that relationship in particular.
Yeah. So because I worked as a nanny for some time, and like I said, when I grew up, I was really interested in what other people's families were like, because I always thought my family was really unconventional, and so it was very interesting to me to just like know what other people's houses and routines and families were like. And I just felt like my family was different in so many ways. Like my mom always worked at night, so there was no like, family dinner in that certain way. And I just was always like, what are families like in this like normal American way? And when I started working as a nanny, I just was like so intrigued by what an intimate snapshot it was into someone's family life, and I nannied for several different families. And I mean, the intimacy is required, for the job, because you have to be, caring for their children, you're in their house. And there's also quite a bit of distance. It was so often that I didn't know a lot of super basic things about the families who I was working for, but then I did know a lot of really personal things about their family. So I just thought that, like, I kind of saw Willa as trying to, like, avoid, the painful parts of her past and kind of just, like, move forward and forget, because she doesn't want to process, she doesn't really want to deal with it. But that when faced with, like, another family, she would kind of, I wanted her to be at this impasse where, like, yeah, she's still kind of trying to avoid it, because, like you said, she's, like, clomping on to this new family, and she's like, maybe this is, like, a family that will ingratiate me. And she gets confused, because the boundaries are very confusing in jobs like this, where so much emotional labor is part of it, where there's an intimacy like this. But I also felt that being part of this family, like, her past would keep popping up and, like, rising to the surface, because you're faced with so many of these things that have to remind you of your own family, of your own home.
Yeah, I love that answer, and thinking about, she can't, like, kind of in thinking about the Adrians as this kind of escape, or kind of, especially thinking about class in particular, right? And, talking about your experience nannying, but, I know my own experience also kind of like, nannying, babysitting, like going into these spaces that, it felt almost like you wanted to touch everything. Like it was like, but also like you can't leave any fingerprints. You can't be known to have like been intrigued by these things, and I think that there's as other things in, Willa's life keep bubbling up, there is such desire, I think, too, in relationship to the Adrians. When Natalie is trying to like give her basically her clothes, like there's something about like, ooh, like wanting to touch them, to wear these clothes, and just like, yeah, was it like to kind of enter a space in which, she very clearly cares about Bijou. Like there is this like really sweet relationship too, but it's also complicated. Like I keep thinking, and Bijou, the kid that's in the story that she's nannying for, takes Mandarin lessons, and I keep coming, I don't know why I'm stuck on this for some reason, that like, this like white kid is learning like Mandarin for fun as like an after school activity. And here, like, Willa is just trying, like, doesn't have, those language skills, and, to kind of also fumble into this space in which she's trying to learn Mandarin. Or I don't know, maybe I'd be curious to kind of hear like your decisions as to kind of having the Mandarin lessons as part of, I don't know, something quite interesting in terms of like Bijou and Willa, but also Natalie kind of want, like, expecting Willa to have also some Mandarin background. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this book is a lot about class as well. And I really wanted to highlight like the class differences, but also, and how seductive like the trappings of their wealth was to Willa, and how much she kind of feels like fooled by like, if I can have this one thing, like, am I part of that as well? And in the same way that, assimilation works, like if I can be this one thing, am I accepted into this larger? And obviously it doesn't work like that. I was also thinking about assimilation with the language, because I mean, I know that there's a lot of families, a lot of kids who grow up, second generation, whose parents maybe didn't teach them how to speak the language because they were trying so forcefully to assimilate when they immigrated. And the goal is to be American, the goal is to distance yourself and become American. But then that's such a loss, it's a loss because it's so hard to feel seen as truly American, and then you have sacrificed this part of your, of your heritage or of your culture. The other thing that I was thinking of is it's honestly just realistic that a private school kid at this age and this time would be learning Mandarin, because many of the children that I nannied for were learning Mandarin at this time, and I believe still are. And it kind of aligned with like the food as well. I feel like there were a lot of things growing up Asian American that people would be like bullied for or ostracized for. And then in like a whiplash effect, however many years later, the food is really trendy. The language is being taught in every school. And it's just like this interesting tension.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And it is an interesting tension because I keep coming back to kind of like this, for Willa, that's very clearly like, different in terms of like what it means to be like taking Mandarin lessons. And at some point, I think Bijou just says, like when Willa asks her question, like, you're not supposed to speak English in this space. And it's just being already like being bad at being her, like being Asian American. Like it's just like a really interesting tension there. But yeah, I kept going back to, and you were talking about class, like, and I'd love it if you could maybe read maybe one last passage for us before we dive into some Q&A from the audience too. But maybe related to my question in the passage with class, I was thinking a lot about the ways in which, that there is this kind of, I don't know what to call it. I'm just like making this hand motion, but this kind of complete lack of awareness in terms of like how they, are treating Willa in many scenes. And again, you're talking about the boundaries, right? Like she gets confused because they're really nice to her. They want to share a glass of wine. They want to like invite her to like family events, like, and she feels as if, she knows that this is her job, but also, these people can be nice to her. But then there are always these moments where she's reminded kind of, continually of the fact that she is hired help. And especially there's a scene in which I'll ask you to read at the kind of dining table where, everyone's eating and, Willa's being seen as that help, even though she's off hours, right? Like she's not working. Would you mind reading that scene?
Sure. Yes. Do you know which part, or do you want me to just choose? Hold on.
I think this is around page 174, 175, 176.
Okay. Okay, I'll eat a couple. Let's see. Okay. Bijou and I prepared 2 trays laden with 5 separate cakes and little forks, a pint container of vanilla ice cream on each tray. I was so used to this now, the trays, utensils, endless bowls for serving, that I'd probably do it forever if I ever moved out. Dessert, I said when we came back out. They were talking loudly about something. Please help yourselves, everyone, Natalie said, gesturing to the platters. I didn't really want cake, but I was still so hungry, so I took one to my seat and sat back down. I thought about what I had stored in my kitchenette, a couple of yogurts, some dried mango. I dug my spoon into the center of the cake. Do you have tea? Lillian said. Natalie nodded. Willa, green, a Japanese kind preferably? I'm sure you know best. My muscles wrapped around each other again. I was tired of this constant edge. Natalie and Gabe weren't perfect, but any prejudices of theirs were neatly tucked away in a place I didn't have to see. Ethan, Lillian, they were different. And yet everything ended with me feeling like the discomfort was my fault. If I made too big a deal about it, if I acted upset, and even if I didn't, like when her kids had held up their eyes at the corners, a cloud still lingered over everything, leaving me to dispel the gloom. So I stood up and started to make tea, filling the kettle with water, standing by and waiting for it to boil. I wasn't sure why I was so angry. I made tea for Natalie and Bijou all the time. It was part of what I was paid for. It was part of why I'd been included in this dinner, sitting at their table. I heard the 3 of them debating about a memory from their youth, the time Ethan had been chauffeured home in a cop car from a party. It is past your bedtime, Miss B, Natalie said. You're going to get the wrong ideas if you hear too much more of your uncle's bad behavior. Willa, bedtime? In 2 trips, I brought out 3 mugs of water and several little boxes of tea, the green kind from Starbucks among them. Let's go, B, I said, her spoon clattered in her bowl. Lillian sat up and reached for the boxes, rifling through. A spoon? She asked, wincing at her own request. I went back to the kitchen and pulled out 3 spoons, folding them into each other on the table. Okay, good night, my sweet niece, Lillian said. She made 3 loud, wet smacks on Bijou's cheek. Bee, meet me in your bedroom, okay? I went to pour myself a mug of tea. I liked having chamomile at night. Tomorrow, Lillian would be gone. I wouldn't need to deal with her again. I closed the kitchen doors behind me and shut off the lights. Good night, everyone, I said awkwardly and turned away. Oh gosh, this tea is hot, Lillian said. It's tea, Natalie said in a girlish giggle. Oh my God, I know, but I can't drink it this way. Could someone bring me a few cubes of ice? Lillian said, prompting an expansive, open silence from the room as everyone waited for someone else to do it. Maybe they were waiting for me. I had turned from the table, already shut the doors. The kitchen is closed, I thought. I had to do my real job, putting Bijou in bed. But no one else had moved. I found myself unable to keep walking away. Were they waiting for me? I thought about sticking my hand right into Ethan's water glass, plunging my fingers into his lemon-tinged water and coming up with a fistful of melted ice. I thought about dropping the cubes into Lillian's glass, one by one or all at once in a tumbling splash. It was the only rebellion I could dream up. But wouldn't that still be doing what she asked?
Oh, I love this section, Kyle. I will also say, as a poet, I just love how like poetry your prose is. There's just so much poetry in this. But yeah, it's kind of like dipping your hand into the glass of, like I love that it's lemon tinged or something, of course it is. And then just taking the ice cubes. And just again, like that green tea moment, like, it's like as if Willa would know best about this, like kind of looking at her. Yeah, it's just such a realistic scene too. I mean, the thing is that as ridiculous as it is, this happens like all the time. And so there's something that's so strong about this scene. I know we have to, I guess, look at some questions too from the audience too, which I'm excited to kind of share with you. But yeah, I guess my last question for you, Kyle, is kind of maybe just like thinking back through your time returning to this book and kind of rereading it, and yeah, just what was the most kind of surprising aspect of you kind of working on this book, or a challenge? But I think maybe for me, it's always kind of interesting to see like a moment of, not an aha moment, but a moment where maybe you felt some sort of maybe deep tether to a particular scene or a particular character, or yeah, just something that surprised you in writing this book.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that one thing that really surprised me in the process of writing this book was how much I really had to learn to trust my intuition and tune out other feedback or other voices. I wrote it for a long time and got a lot of, I started it in graduate school, and I got a lot of feedback from prospective agents, from prospective editors, and who everyone wants something different, or maybe a lot of people didn't understand what I was doing. And it becomes cloudy and hard to kind of trust your intuition when you're being faced with so much rejection with these varying responses. But I feel like when I think about my favorite parts of the novel, they really feel intuitive to me, like they came from some deep place. And like I couldn't tap into that place without letting go of what everyone else had been saying and kind of really trusting myself to create the pieces that I could then rearrange, because I did rearrange the novel a lot. But a lot of the scenes that, like especially the flashback scenes, came from just something that I couldn't explain where they came from. There was something very intuitive about a lot of the scenes, and I found that I ended up feeling like really rewarded by it. And I think that the other thing is that the book, obviously is a lot about loneliness and has a lot of solitude in it, and a lot of scenes with Willa. But I also really did enjoy writing the scenes where she's like at a party or a dinner table, like the one that I read, and there were a lot of like conflicting people and views. And I know that, you know, you mentioned like this dynamic of like people not understanding, or Willa being taken like in and out of employee, friend, whatever, these blurred boundaries. And I felt like I've worked a lot of like service industry jobs where I had always been crossing this boundary. Like, was I working, or did people want to talk to me? Or, you know, people invite you to have a drink, but then like you have to go back and clean up, you know, so this kind of thing. And so I was really interested in like illustrating that. And I think that's why I enjoyed doing the scenes that had a lot of voices in them.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think too, then just hearing you, just like those intuitive moments, especially like the flashbacks to me, felt so much of like what was coming up for Willa, like as she's having these moments. It's just like she couldn't keep that down of sorts. And again, I love that Jersey. It's like flipping from Jersey to New York, and it's just not that far, and it's just like it feels like worlds apart in her kind of experience. Thank you for that answer. We have some questions from the Q&A via the attendees. Thank you for being here, everyone. Oh, actually, one of the questions was very similar to mine, which was what was the best part or most difficult part of publishing your first novel? And also maybe a question too that we haven't touched upon, which is, what advice do you have for someone who feels like they don't belong? That's a tough one. But yeah, what do you think?
I'll answer the first. So I think, you know, the best part of publishing the novel now that it's published, I think, has just been hearing from people, because it ties into the worst part, which was that it was rejected a lot. And a lot of people gave me feedback that kind of all circled around like not being able to really like identify enough with Willa, or find her really that relatable enough to want to like read a book about her. And that was really discouraging to me, not only because that's what I felt the book was about, you know, someone who felt like no one could relate to her, but also because it made me feel like I felt like Willa could be relatable to people from different backgrounds, but the feedback sometimes made me feel like, is the only person who's going to get this book someone of my exact same background, like another biracial Chinese American girl who grew up in a blended family, because I didn't know any other ones. And it made me feel like, well, no one really understand like my book or this character ever. And so it was difficult, you know, to hear that. And but like I said, I really had to kind of go in and try and tune it out. And then I found like the perfect place for my book with an editor who really understood me and really let me like tap into my intuition in these scenes. And then the best part has been that there are so many people from so many different backgrounds who've said that they identified with Willa, and that's just like really rewarding to me, incredibly rewarding. And so that, yeah, that's been really nice. And I think that in terms, yeah, what advice do I have for someone who feels like they don't belong? I mean, I will say that, I mean, I definitely didn't feel like I belonged for a really long time. And sometimes I still do feel that way. And I think it's also okay sometimes to feel like you don't belong, you know. I think that I had this like false idea that everyone else had like a group of friends in their life who shared like the exact same everything, who would understand like every single feeling and experience in their life. But that's not really the case. Like I feel like a lot of people have, you know, different friends who access different parts of themselves, or different places that they go for different things. But sometimes relationships are portrayed differently, you know, and so you start to believe that if you don't have that like all or nothing, maybe something's wrong with you. I think it's sometimes okay to feel like you don't belong. And I think that like I agree with Jane, you know, we know each other through Kundiman, and Kundiman, which is an organization for Asian American writers, would have been incredibly important to someone like Willa. I think it's so important to try and find like your, you know, your group of people who will get you and who will share those experiences. And it was so shocking to me when I discovered people who shared a lot of these moments or experiences that I thought were completely private and distinct to me, like I thought that these were things that had only happened to me. And it's so exciting to find people who like have also experienced those things. So, I would say don't stop trying to find someone that you can be vulnerable with, don't give up on intimacy. And it's just important to feel happy in the way you want to belong, not the way that like you might see it presented by society.
I love that. Don't give up on trying to find that intimacy, that connection. Thank you so much for these questions and for these answers. I was also thinking too, in many ways, like just hearing about the difficulty of like trying to get this book published, and people basically saying that they don't identify with Willa, or just that you're right, this is exactly what Willa is struggling with, right? Like not being able to be fully, like someone turning around and seeing her like as her full self, as who she wants to be, who she's still discovering that, she's still trying to figure that out, what it means to belong within herself. And I was hearing that and just thinking kind of cheesily, but also kind of maybe sweetly, that just hearing all these wonderful words from, readers that identify and connect with Willa, myself included, I almost feel like we are her friends. Like, I don't know, I know that's cheesy, but maybe we are in some weird way, kind of being like, hey, Willa, like, we're part of your community, or at least we see you and we see your experiences and your loneliness and the ways in which that she's still trying to figure it out, right? This is a book that doesn't really end with an ending. It's kind of it has something that's still kind of humming in terms of what she desires, what she wants from herself. And yeah, so that's cheesy, but I was like,
oh, that makes me
Willa.
Oh my gosh, I swear that was like, that's so sweet. I feel like one of the, people have asked about like why, like the way, the voice, or why it was written. And I feel like one of the reasons I really wanted to write it in first person in this really like interior way was because like I wanted Willa to have that. I wanted readers to have that experience with Willa where like you would, because she feels so unseen. I was really hoping that someone reading it would feel like, they saw her. So I love this idea that, Willa's found her people somehow.
Yes, she has. And thank goodness, thank you for, like publishing this book, writing it, and just kind of like, and thinking about what it means to kind of, there's always, I feel like whenever there's somebody that says like this character is not identifiable, I'm always just like, who are those people? Like, I'm like, ... I feel like I know, like, in thinking about kind of the people who like will ignore Willa, right? Or like not see her as, like, is someone getting me tea, right? Or the ice cubes. So yeah, I love that too. And yeah, I will just say again, Kyle, congrats so much on this beautiful book, this novel. I'm so thrilled for you, and your New York Times shout out, all the good news that's coming along with this book. For those of you who haven't read it yet, please do get a copy via Third Place Books. And I mean, I can't wait to reread it. It's kind of, now that I'm thinking about it, it's just like I want to, and like I said, there's so much poetry in this book too for me on the sentence level. So just to kind of dig into that space of hers, just even that opening scene with like kind of what it means to be a nanny, and just kind of the chicken nuggets on a paper toweled plate, like how specific that is. I can see the grease on the paper napkin. But thank you so much, Kyle.
There's truly nothing better than being complimented by a poet on language. So thank you so much. That means a lot to me.
Really beautiful. I mean, this is a type of, it's like, I hate to say it, but I don't read that many novels. And I feel like in many ways, I think that's sometimes language for me. And so like, when I really read a beautiful novel that has such like poetic language, I'm immediately drawn to this. And so, yeah, it's beautiful. Congrats, Kyle.
Thank you so much, Jane. Yeah, thank you so much for being here. It's been really exciting to get to talk to you, and I'm so excited for your next book as well.
Thanks, Kyle. Only wish we could all be in Seattle, like, eating one of those Seattle dogs. There's like the cream cheese hot dog at like 3 a.m. So yeah, another time.
All right. Well, I'm back. Authors, Jane and Kyle, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been so wonderful. Audience members, if you would like to follow those links, now is the time. Go ahead and just scroll up a little bit and go check them out. If you would like to come in and see us, if you're local, we would love that. Obviously, let us know what you thought of this event, either in person or online. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And then I think at this point, Kyle and Jane, just one more huge thank you and congratulations. This has been such an absolute pleasure. Are there any last minute words that you would like to share with us before we say good evening?
I want to say thank you so much, Allie in third place, for having me here, and for everyone who's tuning in. Thank you so much for being here to listen to me talk about the book, and thank you, Jane.
Yeah, thanks, Allie. Thanks, Kyle, and thanks, third place. All the thanks. And yeah, another day we'll have to, eat snacks with Willa and everyone else. I feel like she would probably not want octopus ? I'm not sure. But yeah, baby octopus. For those of you who haven't read the book, you'll see. But just for that scene, the octopus scene. All the feels. All right. Thank you.
So good. All right.
Much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.